Which one?
You want to turn them around?
I wasn't too sure. I thought I was in on that. They were talking about doing something else. I'd like to call the study session to order.
This meeting will also be conducted by audio and video conference without a physically present quorum of the Rock Island City Council due to the disaster issued by Governor Pritzker. Because of this order related to COVID-19 health concerns affecting the state and the city, the mayor has determined that an in-person meeting at City Hall with all participants may not be practical or prudent. All the persons and staff may not all be physically present at City Hall due to the disaster, and physical attendance may be limited. To participate remotely during the public comment or public hearing portion of the meeting, please join by phone at 1-484-469-7957, PIN 564-857-093 #.
Thank you very much. Roll call.
Alderperson Robinson.
Present.
Hertz.
Here.
Gilbert.
Present.
Swanson. Parker.
Here.
Poulos.
Here.
Healy.
Here.
Mayor Tomes.
Here. Thank you very much. Public comment. Nothing back there, and I don't see anybody in the audience that would, but how about virtual? Public comment virtually. Hearing and seeing none, we can move right into the presentation.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Council, Mayor, City Manager. I'm here tonight. There's been some interest expressed from the council and others on the potential development of a campground at Sunset Park. So tonight I'm going to share some information on some potential locations within the park, the different site types that are out there, some feasibility details, and then maybe some direction or discussion with council on the topic. On the screen, you'll see a picture, an aerial view of Sunset Park. Some of the site options would be to the south down here in Petterf Island, might be open to different type of tent type camping. To the east side of Sunset Park down here would be some locations that would have potential. And there's a parking lot over here to the northeast that is also not utilized right now. And there's an old ball field in this space as well. And then we also have some property here on Scaphitis Parkway here that might give some great river views. So as I mentioned, there's 5 different types of sites that could be possible in any location. There's a back-end site, which is illustrated here in the picture. This is the most common site because it uses the least amount of space, gets the most amount of campers on the site. The bottom picture is a pull-through site. It's considered to be very desirable by RVers. It's the easiest site to use. You kind of pull right in and you pull right out. It does take up the most amount of space though. The third type is a pull-in site, and as I mentioned before, in this picture you could see like on Petterf Island where they'd be able to pull in potentially and enjoy some river views if they should choose. The fourth type is a tent site. These are located off of walking trails, like on Petterf Island, for example, where we'd create a trail system through there with numbered sites, where you would pitch a tent, like in the picture illustrated, and you'd have a fire ring, a picnic table, and potentially some electricity to use there. The last site that some campgrounds have are small cabins. These are for folks that don't have an RV and they do not like to tent camp, but they do like to get out and enjoy those activities. So there are a lot of places that have these options available to do so. All of these are potential things that could go into a campground. The idea behind this is do we want to make the marina, Sunset Park, a destination in Rock Island and have amenities such as this that could help offset future costs, expenses for the marina and the park going forward. So just something to explore. I met with 5 different professionals in this line of work. All of them recommend doing a feasibility study. We want to make sure that we right-size what we're trying to do for the location. We want to make sure that we have the amenities. We want to do our homework essentially. And what the feasibility study would consist of would be a site visit. They'd have boots on the ground for 2 or 3 days. They do a market analysis for the market, the demand, the competition to determine what would be needed to be profitable. Based on that information, they'd come up with a conceptual design that's kind of right size. It would be an educated design based on the site visit and the market analysis. And last, they would develop a financial plan. This is a fee development based on design. You'd identify amenities that would attract folks to come to the campground, and you would set fees accordingly. You'd also develop the expense associated with running a potential campground there, the maintenance budget. So what I've found in my research is that the feasibility studies can range anywhere from about $19,000 to $20,000 all the way up to $50,000. It's kind of a wide range, but the 5 different vendors that I met with, that was the range that they had. And obviously, if you wanted us to proceed in investigating this option, an RFP would be needed to get exact pricing. So my recommendation and staff's recommendation would be, if we want to pursue this, a feasibility study would need to be done. We'd want to make sure that we have educated information, real site visit, an analysis of our competition, and what we could charge and what we could expect to make on return if we want to turn this into a destination. Randy?
Are we ready for questioning now? I know this was the end of this part, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So do you have a median range? I know that it's 20 to 50, but do you have a median range number?
There were a couple, 2 out of the 5 that I met with that really impressed me, and I did reference checks on them, and what they did in other communities were around $30,000, $29,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your feedback on this? Do you think this is something that we should pursue? Do you think it's a waste of time? I mean, I know it's kind of putting you on the spot with that kind of question, but.
Yeah, well, I was, it came up from a few council people to go ahead and take a look. I was asked to put together some information that I found out. If we're gonna make investments, let's forget about the dollars just for a second. If we're gonna make an investment in Sunset Marina, and we want to make it a destination, and we want to rent boats and have other auxiliary income to come in, you have to get the people down there first. We can try to rent boats and do other things based on a marina. I think you would see maybe some break-even numbers. If you had a campground along with the marina, you're going to attract people that are going to rent boats, rent paddle boats, rent jet skis. We're going to want to put a potential restaurant, bar, something in that area, because you're stuffing it full of people all year round. It comes down to the financial, as it always does.
Can I pitch in again here?
Sure.
So this is my opinion on this. I mean, I know your opinion. We've had several conversations regarding this, but I think that, at least based on things that I've seen around the Quad Cities, these areas are full almost all the time. And I think it does create a new vision for down there and brings us something that is a destination spot for the city. And then, of course, this could also launch other things down there as well. I mean, we don't know that, but that'd be my anticipation. But anyway, I'm just going to tell you, I'm totally for it, but that's my opinion.
I mean, I'm excited from seeing it, because I think since I've been sitting here on council, that's kind of one of the things I've been looking for. How can we best use that space? It's typically a flood area, so we don't get a lot of use out of it, especially determining how the weather goes. But yeah, if we're able to bring those people in with those different amenities, again, we're not really utilizing anything from the river besides the marina, and that's not really doing what we needed to do. So I think these other things will help out, with the campgrounds, with the rentals of boats, jet skis, different type of things like that, because just the fact I'm coming back from Minneapolis this weekend, and even within downtown, they have paddle boats, they have, all those different amenities that we just don't offer here, but it's open up. I mean, from scooter rentals, you have so many different things you can offer there when you do that, when you bring the people in. And that's a huge attraction to bring them in, especially to subset for, travelers we have coming in for tours and stuff like that. You have a lot of people who come through this area with the campers and everything. Yeah. So yeah, I think we've been missing the bar for a long time with that.
I'm glad you brought up the flooding, because I did bring that up as a concern with the people that I spoke with, and 99% of the campgrounds that sit next to bodies of water, rivers, stream, they flood. So it's part of your normal cleanup that we would have to do at Sunset anyway, would be the normal cleanup for the campground. They put electrical and water type hookups above flood levels, so it would be the normal type of cleanup. And the second thing they were really impressed with was our accessibility to the highway system and where we're located. So those are all in our favor.
I mean, I feel we just have a completely underutilized asset. And why not, long-term, we have to look long-term, why not? I mean, granted, it comes down to dollars and cents, but, you know, I'm all for it if it can be done. I think we need to absolutely look into it, and it just makes sense for the city to bring people in. I mean, we want to attract people. That's the main thing I hear when I'm walking around. How do you bring businesses in? How do you bring people in? Well, you have to give them options. You have to give them things to do. I'd take my kids kayaking. I would love to do it. I'm not a camper. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that, but I'll go down there. I'll rent a jet ski.
Yeah, the cabins are real popular.
So I would like to go forward with it.
We had a campground in my last area I worked for, and on an annual basis, the operations, the revenue exceeded the expenses for the campground. Now, that doesn't speak to the initial investment necessarily, because it had been a campground that was in place for quite a long time, but that's part of what the financial analysis would look at. And then, the only other comment I had is I know somebody who works for a company that runs campgrounds, and they said being located there by the river and the bike path and the other things in the area would be a real desirable place to camp.
Hey, John, I know I'm not a council person, but I have a question for two things. One is, I think if you ride your bike on the bike trail from here all the way up to Port Byron and back, those places are full all the time. I ride, you know, other than when it's snowing and icy, and it's full all the time, which I think is there's a demand for it.
Yep.
And then secondly, I've been to places where if you have persons that don't want to camp out in a tent, sometimes places like the Shabona Creek or an RV rental place will say, hey, if you go to Lake Rathman, you can go, they'll set a place up for you for the week where you can fish out of, and they set it up for you, pull in, it's just like going to a hotel. They've got, fifth wheels that they rent, so that's always a possibility too.
Dylan, did you chime in there?
No, I just rejoined.
Okay, I'm sorry, I heard the ding.
But for what it's worth, thumbs up from me.
Okay, I agree with the same thing. And at this point, we don't know what we don't know. And, there's always been speculation for years, and people talked about it, that if we do this study and everything else, and it turns out that it's not right thing to do, at least we have answers for the citizens that do suggest it. And of course, if it works, we could work on pursuing it. So, but at least I think we could put it to bed one way or the other by spending this and doing the survey, or the consultant.
Well, to piggyback what our wonderful attorney said, in traveling around, I looked in Louisiana to Airbnb a boat, so that's a thing. You have a fifth wheel or something down there like you talked about. It's someone that's coming into our city, and where they go from there, it's things that you can do, so.
Well, I think not.
Miles will tax it.
My only issue, I guess my only concern would be the flooding, but if we can work around that, but I mean, even with the new land we acquired, that may be another spot. I know there's some possibility, hopefully some different type of business will go there, but I mean, we do have areas still close to the river that we can develop into this type of space.
That's a good point.
And I'll bet you we can find a bunch of fill dirt out there, at least somewhere, would be my guess, so.
So I mean, even if Sunset is not the actual location, we still have stuff close with that acquisition that we just received. So, I mean, that land we just received.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We're talking about tonight, annex. Yes, Judith.
So I have a question for Todd. So, because I know it's on the agenda too, to pay Edgewater, and I don't know, it's a budget adjustment or something. So that $24,000, is that coming out of the $1 million pot for Sunset Marina? And this money will also have to come out of there as well?
We could take it out of there, or some of the undesignated, we could take it out of there, or some of the undesignated ARPA funds, but ARPA funds would be the source of funding for the campground study.
Thank you.
Sounds like everybody, and I don't know about Judith, but everybody's.
No, I was
okay.
excited. when
Okay,
I
no, that's
first
great. I just
heard
want
the
to,
idea.
sounds like it's all the way around.
Thank you.
Positive.
Just
Thanks, John,
wanna
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ask about the money.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's fine. Didn't want to assume anything. All right. Miles, I think you're up next.
As it happens, I like to tent camp, so Pettifer Island would be nice. Good evening, everybody. So I want to do kind of a two-parter tonight, kind of give you a little bit of an update on where we're at with the land bank, and then also talk a little bit about housing more generally and kind of where we might want to go from here. So just to recap from the presentation I gave about a year ago, kind of what's a land bank? It's an intergovernmental agency dealing with abandoned foreclosed properties that have become a bit of a problem. Usually takes them through foreclosure or tax auction like the city might normally. And then through that process, it can clear the title, passed on for productive use. Why is this important? Blight, it's a problem, deteriorates our property values, makes the community less attractive, so on and so forth. They're not producing any taxes or benefits when they're abandoned like this. Again, big problem for us. And then, the private investors out there, really, they're not going to go near these because of all of those different liens and issues with the title work. So land bank can be a good tool to help pass these through. It can get rid of all of those different liens. It can put it back out for reliable actors to put the property back into use, getting them out of the hands of tax auction profiteers or the property pirates, as we sometimes call them. Also, it just adds on some additional resources that member governments might not have. It can go and get additional grant dollars to match its members' contributions, and then can kind of just run programs as a partner. So where are we at since last I presented to you? We've been doing a lot of work. But we've also been taking it kind of slow because we've been very, very mindful of the fact that the land bank needs to be fiscally responsible. So a big part of what we've been doing, in addition to hiring a manager, putting the board together, getting some basic policies adopted, is really working on a 10-year pro forma budget. And we've been doing a lot of work talking to other land banks to make sure that we understand all of the different costs associated with their operation and have a realistic projection of how we will get appropriate levels of revenue to at least hit kind of a net zero, right? Ideally, we want to make a little bit money, but the goal is to just break even, okay? So talking about funding for this, you'll recall in the presentation from a year ago, I talked about 3 different options for paying our share of the startup costs. Because again, unlike some of the other land banks in the state, we wanted to be a little bit more responsible and put money out front to make sure that it could actually get off the ground sooner. Some of the other land banks started with no money at all, and they haven't really gone very, very far, very fast. A few others started because they had huge grant kind of endowments. We didn't have that, so we were looking at our individual members to chip in. Our share of the annual cost is $36,571, okay? Moline fronted the money for the first year. East Moline has since paid them back, and now the question is, what are we going to do? At the time I presented to you last, I discussed 3 different methods we might use. One was to look at a grant from IDA called the Land Bank Capacity Program. We were hopeful at the time that that would be something that IDA would keep doing and keep open for new applicants. Moline had previously received this grant in order to help pay for the initial feasibility study of the land bank. That is not available anymore. I had to close the door on that not too long after that presentation to you. So that was taken off the table. We also, all the land banks in the state had a meeting with IDA. We did kind of a big virtual call with them, and IDA affirmed that they will not be making anything like that available again. Could change their mind, we'll continue to pressure them, but right now that resource isn't there. Finding money through the existing budget, probably through a mix of different funds. That was the next option. We've looked around at some of the other grants we have, some of the other dollars we've already secured from IDA. We've looked at CDBG, we've looked at a lot of other things. Nothing else is eligible for use, right? So that one also unfortunately dried up. That brings us to ARPA funds as the last option presented to you a year ago. So here is part 1 of staff's recommendation. Having explored and exhausted those first two choices, ARPA funding seems the most logical. This is what many other communities around the state, including Moline, has actually put their ARPA money toward in part, funding land banks and land banking activities and programs. In our ARPA budget, we put $500,000 towards kind of housing development. If you'll recall, that's kind of an agglomeration of a few different things that we kind of put together because there were a few different takes on housing. What we're talking about here is the previous year, we still need to pay back to Moline. And then the other communities committed to paying for the first 3 years. So we're looking at the past year to pay back and then also paying the next 2 years. That 3-year contribution is the 109,713 number. The idea here is that we want to get the land bank moving. We, at our next meeting in 2 weeks, will finalize that pro forma budget, and I can share that with the council at that time. So we're pretty much ready to go. It's taken us some time to make sure we've covered all of the different details, but we're really ready to roll, and that money can help us kind of get started with the work. Now, number two, the second part of the proposal here. One of the things that's come up as we've been doing some of the strategic planning and budgeting for the land bank is that we've looked at a lot of other land bank strategic plans. And one of the things that it really highlighted was the fact that the city of Rock Island in particular needs its own strategic housing plan. And you'll have heard me mention this a few times in the recent past. We don't really have a plan that lays out what our housing goals are. We don't really have a document that spells out how we're going to accomplish those goals. Many other communities do have those plans, and from the examples I sent out to the council on Friday, if you've had a chance to look at them, you can see that they take slightly different forms depending on the type of community at play, but all of them have more than what we have, which is nothing at present. Okay. Staff has spent a lot of time thinking about how the rest of that ARPA money that's dedicated to housing could be used, and we certainly can come up with some kind of one-off programs that might be of some help, but it might be wiser to actually develop a plan first that can inform us as to how we can take those dollars and stretch them further, make longer-term, more impactful investments. There might be a lot of creative solutions that we would not on our own think of that a planning process would help us become aware of. So the kind of two-part proposal here is to pay for those 3 years for the land bank, get that up and running. It's doing really critical work, or will be doing critical work for our community in particular, because tax abandoned properties are a real problem for us. And then number two, before we go and spend all the rest of that money, actually do some due diligence work and develop a plan that lays out how best to spend that money, how responsibly spent that money could be. So, in summary, those are the two proposals that we were hoping to get some feedback from all of y'all tonight. So, questions?
I have a couple. The plan that you're talking about, is that going to be done by staff, or are we looking to hire that out?
We're looking to hire that out. So what we're looking to do is put out an RFP to figure out, first of all, what that might cost, and then we could come back to council and talk a little bit about what that costs. But the thing here is that we'd be looking for someone with more expertise than we have. One of the things that staff is trying to be very self-aware about, we are not housing developers. Housing is not something that any of us have a specific background in. And we want to bring in someone who can really help put together something with greater detail than we would likely be able to create in-house.
Well, to key off of that then, among all of the cities that are involved in this, are you telling me that there's no expertise in any of the cities?
In the participating cities, we have, of course, folks who are specialists in like housing rehab programs funded by CDBG funding, but that's really the extent of it. None of the staffs typically, and you would see this across many different communities, they don't have folks who are necessarily experts on housing development, like new housing development or infill development. They might have ancillary roles administering grants that contribute to those efforts, but they are not themselves necessarily housing experts in that way.
And my mind was going how to get more bang for the buck.
Oh, sure.
The second question I have is that $109,713, is that the total amount or is that per year?
That's the total amount for 3 years.
I just wanted to be clear on that.
Yep,
And you would take that out of the 500,000?
Correct.
That's not in addition.
correct.
So how much would you even think the RFP would come in at?
It would really depend on the scope of the plan that we were looking to get. If you reviewed those 5 examples that were sent, you can kind of see they range from like a 40-page, pretty simple thing, to something much longer and more involved. One of the things that we have talked about as a staff is putting together an RFP where a respondent could put together like their high, medium, and low-cost options for a plan. Some of the things that might not be in the low-cost option, which would be like robust citizen surveying or like input from the public, could be included in one of those higher tiers. You'll have noticed that I believe the plan from the county in Virginia includes almost renderings and examples of infill development and new subdivisions. Obviously, that's an added cost if you want someone to put together those kinds of drawings. So we could kind of look at a few different kind of cost options. Ultimately, though, we really won't know what it costs until we put it out and get responses.
But I understand, I'm just kind of piggybacking on what Mark said is, I would hate to spend $50,000 or 10% of this budget on a consultant rather than being able to take 5 houses and give them $10,000 of a match. That's my only concern. If
Sure.
that was an option.
Sure,
You
and
know,
one
I'm
of the
just-
things, of course, to keep in mind is if we put an RFP out and it comes back crazy expensive, we can all look at each other and say, maybe we should reevaluate. The question here is, from staff, is just, would the council be comfortable if we went ahead and put something out to try to get answers to that kind of question?
Okay, I have lots of questions. Okay, so the repayment that's due, is that 1 year or all 3 years?
It's just the 1 year in reverse that we do need to pay back. The thing, though, we are suggesting here is to get the land bank over the initial hump so that it can sell some properties to get revenue.
Right.
About
Okay.
3 years.
I get that. So, you knew about this last year when we approved the land bank. So why wasn't it included in your department's budget for 2023, the cost for the 1 year?
In the budget itself or in like the original ARPA budget?
No, the CED budget.
Because at the time that the development of that budget was taking place, we had not yet finished exploring the other options.
Okay, and you said CDBG money's not eligible?
It is not eligible for this use.
Okay, so I have a real problem with that 500,000. First of all, that's supposed to be for infill and market rate housing. And we're gonna spend 109, almost 110,000 out of that to pay our costs, our share of the land bank. Then potentially another 50,000 for an RFP, which is now whittled down our 500,000 for market rate housing down to, I can't do it, 340, that's what I thought. So I'm like, it doesn't leave us very much. There's also $250,000 that was allocated of ARPA money for rehab. So why don't we use some of that money for these costs?
Well, of course, the council could do that if it wishes. I do want to throw out there that $50,000 cost,
that
that
was
was just
absolutely
voiced
untrue.
now,
Well,
but
yeah,
that
no, I
was-
get it. So I looked at the studies, and 4 of them I really didn't feel like were applicable to our situation. Decatur was because, 1, they have poverty like we do. 2, they have population decline like we do, and they've lost major employer. So that one, I thought, most closely suited our own experience here. I thought it was a very straightforward study, and actually it was a request for ARPA funds, but it was straightforward and that it was just full of data. It was taking the data and just laying out, here's where we're at, here's where we're at, kind of thing, when you have these kinds of conditions. Now, we have what, 1, 2, 3 urban planners on staff?
At present, we have none.
Okay, those with urban planning degrees, let me rephrase.
We have one. We will be hiring another urban planner to start in mid-May.
We don't have 2?
No. So,
Elementary.
as of right now, we have Tanner Osing, the planning and zoning manager.
Yeah.
He has just made an offer to someone to fill the one remaining urban planner position we have on staff. There was a second urban planner position, and we permanently removed that from the budget. So again, one of the things that I want to make sure, and this is, I'm appreciative of you bringing it up, staff are trying to be mindful of the fact that our bandwidth is reducing over time. We are not as able as we have been in the past to produce in-house plans like this. We simply don't have the time and resources in-house to allocate towards it.
Well, I feel like we're getting back to a situation when I came to the city and Dylan came to the city, that we were hiring consultants for every little study that needed doing. And council put a stop to it. They were like, enough. Let's do some of this work in-house. And from what I saw of that Decatur study, I thought it was very easily doable in-house.
Sure, I believe the city of Decatur hired Tesca Associates out of the
Yes,
Chicago
and I'm
area to do it.
familiar with Tesca Associates.
yeah.
But if you use that as a model,
Anytime we look at whether or not to use a consultant, it really comes down to several considerations. We like to do everything in-house possible that we can. You have to ask yourself, do we have the expertise? If we do, you have to say, do those people with the expertise have the time to do it? And then sometimes consultants have access to resources we may not have, data, software, other kind of analysis capabilities. And you know, after we contemplate those questions, that's when we make a decision whether or not you should hire a consultant to do the work or not. Staff does a lot of work. Engineering department does a lot of work that oftentimes is consulted out. Planning and zoning do some of it as well. One of the things I think that you see now, though, is we have access to some additional resources that would allow us to consider doing studies we've never done before. You know, in that housing is one of your highest priorities. Some type of housing study is really essential to help guide those decisions. You know, when you're contemplating whether or not we should do more affordable housing, you know.
we're whittling down these ARPA allocations by all of these studies. If you want to spend what's needed for the land bank and the study out of your housing rehabilitation ARPA allocation, but I certainly do not want to whittle down $1 of that market rate allocation.
Yeah, and really, all the different housing components, I think you can look at kind of comprehensively. But what you need to make good decisions on how to use that money is some data and some strategy, and I think that's where the housing study comes in. So I don't have a problem if you want to spend it down to the 250 rather than the 500. One of the things the study can do to you is if you have an independent source, kind of verify what kind of demand exists for different kinds of housing. If it comes back and says, hey, you got great demand for, you know, high-level housing, you can take that or shop that around to developers and say, look, we've done this independent study. It shows there's a high demand for, you know, $500,000 homes, and then you can try to convince them to build those homes. If Miles says it, nobody believes him. If somebody from Chicago says it, everybody believes him.
Nobody believes me.
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Judith is saying. I'm not saying we don't need to hire a consultant and work on getting that knowledge, but we have not, over the years since I've been here, emphasized and really we put very little effort toward market rate housing. We've done a lot through rehabilitation and affordable housing and supported different things, but we've really, and I hate to use it strong instead of saying we put zero, really, for market rate housing anywhere, anyhow. And I think it's time that we focus on that and take a look at what we can do to stimulate that market in the city of Rock Island.
A study will address that. It's just not going to address lower income. It'll address demand for housing in all different categories, including, market rate
Right.
or above.
But we need in as much, and once again, if it is market rate, we may need as much of that $500,000 as possible to stimulate that. Yes, go ahead.
A few comments. I guess I would, on the piggybacking off of the conversation going on right now, and can everyone hear me? First
Yes,
off?
yes.
Okay. $500,000 is going to be a drop in the bucket for market rate housing incentives. I mean, let's just be real here. Like, a single market rate house that that we are envisioning here, like what they're building in Bettendorf, is one house at $500,000. So let's just be a little realistic in thinking how far we can make this ARPA dollars go with respect to high-end market rate housing. I was going to clarify, so we have two things. One is the land bank contribution, and the other being the strategic housing plan, which, like Todd, you just said, the strategic housing plan would include all types of housing, not just low income or whatever we want to call it. I guess if people are concerned about using the $500,000 for market rate housing for the land bank funding, I can understand using the 200,000 or 150, whatever it is we've got allocated for low-income housing for that portion. However, I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest we use a portion of the market rate housing funds that we've set aside for the strategic housing plan, as it will include market rate housing, suggestions or strategies, whatever we want to call it. And so I guess that sort of summarizes my thoughts on that. But I did want to ask Miles, so you've proposed here 3 years of funding coming from ARPA, and for the land bank project specifically. I very much am mindful of what you were talking about at the beginning of your presentation about making sure that it's sufficiently funded to actually get off the ground and do stuff, and thinking sustainably, long-term. And so with respect to long-term, after these first 3 years, how do you envision the land bank will be able to remain financially sustainable?
It would be dependent on a few different sources of income. One is obviously through the sale of properties that the land bank acquires. So let's say we acquire something at tax auction for, when all is said and done, a few $1,000s. Maybe there's a house that we spend a little money to clear out because it's got junk left behind in it. Maybe we take down a problematic tree, we mow the grass a couple of times while we have it listed, and we sell it for $12,000. Whatever the profit on that is then rolls back into the land bank. And the idea here is over time you're acquiring and selling and turning over more and more properties to increase the revenue. Other sources include grants that the land bank may pursue. Also contributions from an increasing number of member municipalities. We're still hopeful that other communities, including, say, Silvis or Pineland, will have an interest in joining the land bank in the future and contributing their resources to it. There's all sorts of other potential, asks the land bank might make, and people may want to contribute to it as kind of donors who believe in the cause. So you can have a pretty diversified source of revenues over the longer term. At the core of it, though, it's really the turning of the properties into productive ones. So, making sure you sell them at enough of a profit to keep things floating.
Rockford, I believe, covers its cost by serving as trustee for the county, don't they?
That is true, and we have talked a little bit about that. That'll be a longer-term conversation we'll have to have with the county here, but yes, that is a possibility.
Miles, has there been any discussion among the land bank about establishing I think we have the ability to establish a local property transfer fee. I think I've raised this idea for the city of Rock Island, but there was suggestion that, well, maybe if our neighboring communities do it, we would be considering doing so as well. Has there been any discussion among the land bank participants like Moline and East Moline about let's all jump together and pass a local option property transfer fee to fund something like this?
We haven't really, we've mentioned it, though we have not explored it in depth. We kind of see that as a longer-term conversation alongside the trustee conversation. We're not sure how palatable that would be with our respective city councils. So we haven't had lengthy discussions of it quite yet, but it is a long-term thing to consider.
It certainly would establish a long-term sustainable funding mechanism for something like this. And I think as we see the land bank kick into action, the good work that it's anticipated to do would be worth investing, in my opinion. So 1 out of the 24 city council members between Rock Island, Moline, and East Moline would be very much in support of something like that.
So the land bank, besides clearing up all the title issues, right? Do they also do the rehabilitation or no?
So I'm glad you bring that up, because that's been one of the things that we've spent a lot of time trying to decide. What is the appropriate kind of scope of services the land bank should offer? One of the benefits of the land bank is that each of our members might have slightly different needs the land bank can help them address. Rehab was one of the things that we spent the longest time considering, because we weren't sure whether we could make more money if we put some money into the property to rehab it, right? So could we make more money turning them over if we did a little rehab? Ultimately, what we decided is for the members at present, that is not the priority of the land bank. The priority of the land bank for Rock Island and Moline is just to turn the properties over, getting them out of the cycle of abandonment. East Moline, it's a little bit different. They're not a home rule community. So they have kind of 2 things they need the land bank for, neither of which are rehab. One is, of course, to acquire properties and break the cycle of abandonment. That's number 1. But number 2 is they need help with demolition, because they have a much harder time as a non-home rule community going through what we would normally go through with the 2x2 demolition process. They just don't have the same statutory flexibility that the other members do. So the land bank would be primarily focused on just that breaking cycle of abandonment, clearing the title. But in the case of East Moline and potentially future non-home rule communities, they might also seek demolition assistance. So those things are being built into that pro forma 10-year budget projection.
So you clear the title, but you still have a blighted property,
Yep.
and then what, you hope to sell it to somebody then who'll invest the money to fix it up?
Yep, and that's what they do in the other land banks. So Rockford was brought up. That's the Region 1 land bank. It serves many, many different communities. Basically, all the land bank is doing is clearing the title and then turning it over to a developer. They usually have a recapture agreement that they will execute with the purchaser, where they promise within 12 months of acquisition to have brought the building up to code, and have it occupied. So they do have that as kind of like a little fail-safe, but they don't do anything except just kind of maintain the property while they're holding it, which is really limited to just like mowing. If a tree limb falls, clearing that up. The whole goal is to not hold it for very long at all, because the longer you hold it, the more it costs. They're really just trying to turn them over. A lot of private investors are going to steer clear of these properties because of all the liens and back taxes owed on them. That's why they're stuck in that cycle of abandonment. The land bank intervenes, clears the title. All of a sudden, it does look like a much more attractive investment for people. And if you're selling it just at enough of a price to keep the land bank functioning, you're still getting a pretty good deal. You might be buying a house for $12,000 that you can put, a good amount of money into and then sell or rent for pretty good rates. So that it's really actually a lot more simple in certain ways. And one of the things, again, kind of talking about what the role of the land bank has been, is we've all been kind of fighting the urge to make it more complicated because a lot of us are running rehab programs, right? So we really explored that. Simpler is probably better.
So how do we prevent some of those management companies taking advantage of this and tripling and quadrupling the rent when they get that process, expedited for them?
So you're talking about, like, how do we make sure that the housing remains affordable?
Right.
That could be stipulated as part of the kind of redevelopment agreement someone signs when they take possession of the property. We've talked through whether or not that should be a part of this. And at this point in time, we're not sure whether it should be. It's really a question of, to kind of piggyback off something else, we've talked about how there is a clear need for like a rental rehab program, okay? If it's funded with CDBG funds, right, we have to ensure that it remains an affordable rent rate.
Right.
Other communities that do that usually say to the landlord who's, receiving money for their property, you have to prove to us for the next 5 years by submitting proof every, let's say, 6 months, that you are continuing to charge an affordable rent rate. There's a lot of administrative burden keeping track of all that. If the land bank works the way we hope it will, then the volume of properties that it's turning over will increase over that 10-year period. At what point is that administrative burden no longer quite worth it? We're still not totally sure. So I don't have a particularly good answer for you, except to say that we have talked about it, and we're going to continue that discussion.
Well, then going along with what Alderman Robinson was saying, what are we doing to keep control of our current absentee landlords that are letting the properties become less valuable?
So one of the things that we're working on is to continue to improve our rental inspection program. The new building official has been making quite a lot of changes to just the processes that we use, more streamlined checklists, more aggressive scheduling, really hunting people down. We're in the process of filling a vacant housing and property maintenance inspector position that has been empty since before the pandemic. So we've been understaffed. We're staffing back up. One of the things that a housing plan could help to help bring into focus is other improvements we could make. So the thing with that housing plan, right, the way that staff has talked about it and the way you probably saw in those examples, it's not just about new housing. It's about existing housing and how we can better maintain it. I think suggestions from that process on how the rental program could be improved, expanded, made more robust, our enforcement mechanisms made heftier and stronger. Those would be some of the things out of that planning process that I would be most interested in.
Is there a process that you have discussed in your department where that information can be filtered down to council members? Because
there was a request by a council member about getting a more in-depth report on how that particular program and the enforcement that goes with it takes place. The city manager and I think, are going to touch base on that here and kind of talk about how we might better show how that works and kind of give more regular updates. You can see just the base inspections numbers in the monthly operations report, but there's more information we could provide if that's of interest to council. And we could just include that with the monthly operation report, so.
Yeah, I would just say that I'm very much interested in that strategic housing plan, specifically for how it could improve the rental housing inspection program. That's a big reason that I'm supportive of the strategic housing plan.
The biggest problem you run into, or at least the one that I see all the time through municipal code enforcement, is you have certain folks here, and I'm sure you guys know the names, they package these in groups of 10. So I come to you and I say, hey, I live in Newark. I've never been to Rock Island. I don't even know where Rock Island is on the map. And they say, I'm going to sell you a package of 10 rental units, and you're going to put them in individual LLCs, and I'm going to tell you you're going to get 10% back on your money. And by the way, I've got a company that'll help manage those properties for you. I'd be happy to discuss this with you. It's a big problem. So you have people that get cited for their properties. They're like, I've never been to Rock Island. I thought it was in Idaho, right? And like, no, it's here in Illinois.
I've had some
like,
funny.
Well, they're like, how could I possibly be being dragged into some sort of, you guys are this backwards rental enforcement stuff, and they have no idea. They've never seen the properties that they've purchased. They have no idea they buy them from people here who are around here, and they package them. It's pretty amazing. It's pretty atrocious.
I've woken people up from a nap in Pasadena or out in, Tampa many times where they're shocked to learn that they own something here.
Yeah.
So it really
is a
weird
They're
issue.
outraged to know that you think that they should have water and heat and a roof.
Yeah.
But I'm quite sure that they're not shy about going to the bank
Absolutely not.
with that check. So in that regard, that would be.
I concur with you 100%. Unfortunately, the property laws as they are set up, in this humble servant's opinion, they take advantage of everything that they can. They come here and do as little as they can. They seek the protection of the LLC, and the band plays on.
If council members will recall from the Unplugged event, it's exactly that kind of thing, along with other things, that is about the kind of wealth extraction of the community, right? So a community like Rock Island is preyed upon through these mechanisms, and all of the wealth associated from these properties is sucked out of us. And actually addressing it, though, is really challenging. Finding out how we can improve our enforcement and citation processes to try to do as much good as we can is important. But I don't want council members to be under any illusion that there is some perfect, ideal solution to what is very, very complex systems of problems.
There are forces at work that are well beyond our control that encourage this kind of behavior. Miles did a really nice job of hitting it when you were talking about it, the wealth extraction at the Unplugged meeting. 30 years ago or 25 years ago, I used to represent landlords, and the Attorney General's office had they had a new statute that they were going to use to talk about problem properties, and I'm sure Chief Landy knows all about it too. Started hitting the pocketbooks of some of the folks in Chicago, and all of a sudden, the AG that came down to talk to us about how to do this enforcement said, we've kind of rethought this whole thing, and we're just going to kind of back off. So there are forces at work that are going to be beyond our control. That doesn't mean you don't do anything, but the reality of the situation is it's big business, and it's tough to stop.
Can we put a restriction on you have to live within so many miles of the city in order
So we
to be a landlord?
Yeah, so we currently have requirements that if you have a rental property here in the city, you have to have a local management company. So we do have that requirement. Whether or not it's a good management company, a responsive management company, a company that will actually work with us, that's another matter.
And if you buy one of those packages of 10, that comes along with the whole package.
Yeah.
Well, you can register your LLC that owns it anywhere you want, so.
Good things to be vetted out in a strategic housing plan.
Yep.
So just so staff has
Also with
some-
your state legislature perhaps as well.
Yeah, for real. Just so staff has some sort of sense of how to proceed, on a general level, putting the exact source of funding aside, is there a basic sense that doing some sort of strategic housing plan is a good idea? Is that just on a base level, that's something that staff should explore? Okay, seeing some heads.
Yes.
Okay.
Can't
I have a
just sit
question,
on-
quick
Yes.
question. So, as far as these plans and putting out the RFP, and maybe I missed this earlier in all the conversation, but what is the plan that Moline and East Moline, have they done similar, the same? Are they doing an RFP out?
Actually, they have not, but they are thinking about it.
Well, and the reason I'm bringing this up is if this is an intergovernmental agreement which has a mutual board, has a mutual, isn't this something that you would think that the whole group would go in on to assist,
Yeah.
like
So-
working together instead of us?
So the strategic plan that staff is talking about tonight is not a strategic housing plan for the land bank. It would be a strategic housing plan for the city of Rock Island. I have discussed with the other cities going in together on it, but there's a little trap door under that, and I've been direct with them about this. The situation with our housing stock is very different than the situation with their housing stock. If you compare, just, drive around in the neighborhoods of most of Moline versus most of Rock Island, you will see the differences. They're very focused on their need for more affordable housing. They have a shortage of it. We have a lot of natural affordability. We're really different markets. So there are some merits to going in together with other communities to do certain regional planning efforts. Staff has talked across, the city boundaries about this. It may not, in this case, actually make sense, given the differences between us. There's always a concern that Rock Island's needs get subsumed by the needs of the group, which are very different than ours.
And the reason for my ask was just the fact that everything else seems to be it's an effort between all, and they're all working together, and so I just thought, well, why not look into
Yeah, and we've talked about it, and really every time we think about doing any sort of big planning effort, we always do think about whether or not it should be a regional effort or not. Depending on what the subject is, it could be good or a bad idea to do that. We have really talked about how the land bank itself should be the focus of our collaboration around property issues, but each of us have very distinctive housing needs, and so doing a plan altogether might not actually benefit any of us. It may be better, as we've kind of moved the conversation forward, to each do our own plans. So using Moline as an example, they don't have a strategic housing plan, but this conversation as a land bank board we've had about kind of housing planning generally is leading them to similar conclusions to what I have presented to you.
How old is our impediments to fair housing plan?
They're redone every 5 years, so we're coming up on the time where we're going to be going out with Moline and Davenport, the other CDBG entitlement communities, to do a new one.
So it was last written in,
A little over 5 years ago now, I think.
A lot of good questions.
Okay.
Things to think about.
Regarding the nature of funding, I would ask that council members communicate with myself and the city manager about what your preferences are, both in terms of funding the land bank, funding it out of whichever pot. Just let us know what we should bring forward. I think we want to try to get things moving, and if folks have some ideas about maybe that money coming from some other place, I think we would be very open to those conversations. Any other questions? Important topic. So if you have any other thoughts or anything else you want to share with staff, please let us know.
All right, any other comments? Anybody questions, thoughts? All right, thank you, Miles, appreciate it. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
Move to second, any discussion on it? Roll call.
Alderperson Parker.
Aye.
Pulis.
Aye.
Healy.
Aye.
Robinson.
Aye.
Hertz.
Aye.
Gilbert.
aye.
And Swanson.
I don't think I can vote because I
didn't
wasn't
want
here at
me
the
in.
beginning.
We're just adjourning.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. She can still vote on that, yep.